with this typical systolic, diastolic thump, push, with the typical occasional arrhythmias that are there too. And the nurses here, they go crazy when the nurses hear the thump, push. But anyway, the babies in the nursery sleep much better, eat much better, and they're much healthier, cry far less, and everything else. Now they put it in a little teddy bear. That's I don't know what it's called now, but anyway, the May company sells them. Go bye-bye bear. Oh no, rockabye bear. And when the baby's crying in the crib, they just put the teddy bear in the crib with the tape recorder inside the teddy bear, and they push the button and hit thump push, and within 15 seconds the child's asleep, which is a boon for blurry-eyed parents. But anyway, what happens is the child replicates the experience that it's had already in the womb of hearing the woman's heartbeat. Now, when a child's in the crib, it can learn to relate to humans, especially through the eyes. The eyes are the windows of the soul. And so if you have a baby, it's good to have mobiles cutting out of magazine pictures and things, pasted on cardboard, and they floating over, hung by threads over the child. So he's always looking at eyes. That child will relate much better socially to people as he grows older if you have that. We want to always work toward socialization, towards relating person to person, toward emotional intimacy. That's the important thing. Sometimes physical intimacy by the touching, the cuddling, the nuzzling, and all that, but emotional intimacy must go with it. Now, when a child is growing older, it starts to bifurcate into the male and female responses. The girls have one response, especially to the father, between the ages of 7 and 11. The boys have another response to the mother between the ages of 5 and 8, usually, what Freud called the Oedipal complex, which is far more scientized now than it was in his time. But the boy has to relate in a very loving way to the mother during that particular period, and the mother has to respond to the child for this certain fulfillment, and the girl to the father. The girl needs very strong, supportive, chaste love from the father, obviously not incestuous love or anything like that, but really strong, supportive, confident love from the father. If the girl does not receive strong, supportive, consistent love from the father between the ages of 7 and 11, then that girl will have not just an emotional problem to some degree, but will have her IQ, her intelligence quotient will be impaired for life. She may turn out to be a very intelligent woman, but she'll be far less intelligent than she would be if she had that father's love at that critical period, hypercritical period from 7 to 11. When I was teaching at Immaculate Heart College in Hollywood, I did some corroborative studies on that particular problem, that research. So that's very important for the girl to get father's love in 7 to 11 period. It's going to determine the type of man she looks for in marriage later on. It's going to determine how she relates to men after that. It's going to determine how she relates to her own children after that. Her own love capacity is going to be determined by that. And also, this is where we have a co-relationship between the emotional life and the intellectual life. They blend together, especially in their formative periods chronologically. They blend together, intellectual and emotional things blend together in girls between the ages of 7 and 11. Those things have to coalesce. And that's why relating to a father is critically important for a girl. For a boy, relating to the mother. Now, I'm going to shock some of you, so tighten your seatbelts. Think of your mother. If your mother was a very warm, loving person who hugged you a lot and kissed you a lot and complimented you a lot and praised you a lot and supported you a lot, then you're a very privileged person. If she was not that, if she was cold, official, maybe essentially a career woman that just didn't have time for the kids or whatever, if she was not really close to you, then you are a selfish person. In this sense, you will have very little sympathy for others unless you create it by real arduous effort. You will have very little empathy for others. So if you read someone starving, 40,000 people die of starvation every day, 3/4 of them are children. That's a headline. That doesn't impress you very much as your own headache. You're more concerned about your headache than you are the fact that 40,000 people die of starvation, 1 every 2 seconds. That's a nice statistic. You say, yeah, as I begin this sentence, the children are alive who'll be dead when I finish the sentence. But say, yeah, that's a nice statistic, but it doesn't make your heart bleed for them. In other words, you don't have a real capacity for empathy and sympathy if you did not have a warm, loving mother. The mother will determine for both boys and girls the degree of sympathy, empathy, or conversely, selfishness, self-centeredness, demanding things for yourself, and temper tantrums and crying till you get your own way and all this sort of thing. Your mother will determine that primarily. A mother determines a lot of things in the way the child does. Now, as we're talking about these things, I want to interrupt myself here to say this. Interrupt myself. Rudely interrupt myself here. You're thinking about how you have been hurt, perhaps, by your parents who didn't give you enough love or the right kind of love. So you're looking upward to them, and while you're thinking of this, you may have a subtle kind of resentment against your parents, even if they acted through ignorance, as most probably they did. You may have a resentment against them because you've been love cheated. Okay? That's a negative emotion of resentment. Watch out for that. We've got to heal that too later. But you may also be thinking downward, if you are a parent, that you may have damaged your children. Then you have not resentment, but guilt. Oh my God, now he tells me this. They acted through ignorance, as most probably they did. You may have a resentment against them because you've been love cheated. Okay? That's a negative emotion of resentment. Watch out for that. We've got to heal that too later. But you may also be thinking downward, if you are a parent, that you may have damaged your children. Then you have not resentment, but guilt. Oh my God, now he tells me this. So we got two reactions here. You're thinking of how you were victimized by your parents and how you are victimizing your children being their parent. The two directions, you must cope with the reaction to those two things. In one case, guilt, the other case, resentment. Now those are the same two. Remember, hostility, guilt, those are the same two antinomastic emotions we're talking about. Those are the peaks of the pyramids we were talking about. So make sure you don't get overwhelmed with either one of those. You deal with them objectively and ask the Lord to heal you in your relationship to your parents who have hurt you, perhaps, or neglected you in some way, and the guilt by which you may have neglected your own children. Meanwhile, of course, you resolve to do what you can from this point on with your children, depending on their age and capacity and all that. There's a period among boys especially called the lionizing period. Normally it's pre-adolescent, between 8 and 11. Well, between 9 and 11. But today our kids are very precocious. And so it's dropped down. Child psychologists now say maybe 8.5, maybe even 8 to maybe 10 and a half, 11. That lionizing period. The lionizing period is where the child looks at the father. If the father is a Dodger fan, the boy's a Dodger fan. If the father smokes, the boy will want to smoke. If the father goes to church frequently and devoutly, the boy will do it easily. If the father kneels down next to his bed and says his night prayers with the child will do that. He'll tend to lionize or identify, and especially in areas of spirituality, of ethics, and of moral issues and devotion, such as receiving the sacraments, receiving communion frequently, and things like that. The child will identify with the father, the boy with the father, the lionizing thing. If he sees that the father is stealing stamps from the office and cheating on his income tax and has race prejudice in his ways, the words he uses and things like this, that child will pick that up and he will create the father will create a permanent damage to the boy during a critical period of sensitivity called the lionizing period. So a boy especially, related to the father, can be formed or malformed in a special way during the hypercritical period of the lionizing period, pre-adolescent period. Okay. Now, I got so much to say, and I just want to get going.
We're listening.
I hope you're registering in your own mind the target areas to pray for now, and what has happened in your life, so you can ask the Lord. Keep that in mind. The only reason I'm giving you the scientific data is for that. The spiritual part mainly will come later, but you've got to prepare for the spiritual prayer, tomorrow's prayer, with this thing we're giving now. Find out areas that you've been damaged. We want to see where you're sick. And by the way, I'm going to make you sicker before I make you well. Okay, now, look at yourself as a teenager. If you're a parent who has teenagers, look at them. Ask yourself this question. Is there any danger that adolescent is involved in premarital sex, intercourse. 99% of all the seniors in New York City have had sexual relations before marriage. 99% of all seniors in public schools have had, and probably equivalent Catholic schools too, I guess, private school. 99% have had sex relations before marriage. That's fornication. Okay? Now that's a major problem, not only for AIDS and venereal diseases and things like that, but the morality of this thing. Because Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 4:1 that those who practice fornication will be severely punished by God, and adultery, those who are unfaithful to their wives, as well as those who have extramarital intercourse. God will punish you severely for this. It's unrepented of. So we're dealing with a moral issue here as well as a psychological issue. How can you prevent that? If you do three things, you can prevent your child from ever engaging in fornication. Three things. But it has to start from the point of birth of that child. So you think of future parents now. Now you tell me, huh? Okay, the first thing you do, the child from early infancy on through adolescence, through late adolescence, must experience a manifestation of love between the mother and the father. In other words, they cannot just say the father and mother love each other. They have to see that. The arm around the shoulder, the holding hands, watching TV, and all this manifestations, and the kissing and goes off to work and things of that sort. By the way, in that matter, in Germany, the insurance companies did a study of men who kissed their wives every morning before going to work. And they said anyone who promises to do that, they'll lower the premium, insurance premiums, because they found out these actuaries, the actuaries are very scientific, and they won't put money on the line for something that isn't proven. But they prove that these men will they live 5 years longer than men who don't kiss their wives, statistically. So the insurance company based on that, and they also have about half of the health problems, especially high blood pressure and cholesterol problems, with men who do kiss their wives lovingly. So the insurance company steps in and says, if you do this, we'll lower your insurance premium. That's very significant because we're dealing with money, big institutions here, and they don't waste money. Okay, now, so the child has to, first thing the adolescent has to see is from infancy all the way through late adolescence must see mommy loves daddy. Boy, mommy really loves daddy, and daddy really loves mommy. Look how they love each other. And they constantly grow up with the idea that there is a strong bond of love between the mother and the father. That's the first thing that has to be done. And it must be done consistently. So the end result of that is the child sees male, female, masculine, feminine, sees two kinds of love and finds them complementary, that they complete or complement each other, and finds as a result of that commitment. They intuit the concept of commitment. Marriage is commitment, not a one-night stand, and not a marriage that's ready for divorce, to fragment. A child doesn't get a sense of insecurity. Mommy and daddy might break up and I'm going to be left here, and the terrible fear of a child on the verge of the parents' divorce. There's great security in that child in seeing, I belong to this family constellation and mommy and daddy love each other. I always have them together in this. Now the second thing is related to that. Not only must be a crossfire of love between the mother and the father, think of an upside-down triangle, the parents at the top and the child at the bottom. The crossfire of love between the mother and the father at the top. And then, the second thing, must have love from the mother and the father toward the child. Expressed love, remember. As Shakespeare said, he does not truly love who does not express love. It has to be expressed love. So the mother must love that child consistently and show it. And the father must love that child consistently and show it. From infancy through adolescence. Different ages of different, boy is loved differently than the girl. The father may tousle the hair of the boy at the age of 8, play football with him, an arm around the shoulder, walk into the ball game or something. Whereas the girl may jump on the lap and be hugged closer. There's different ways in which love is shown at different ages, different sexes of the child. There's different manifestations, but the love should be appropriate and consistent. So the child now is receiving love and understands the masculine and feminine love, which is a very subtle thing that a child can grasp, the powerful distinction between the two kinds of love coming to that child consistently. The child gets security in saying those same two sources of love for him or her, same two sources to the child, are the ones that love each other. And now they have the stability of family life. That's the way God designed family life to be. So those two things. Now the third thing to prevent fornication in adolescence is the child has to be given a sense of ought, a sense of duty. Something has to be done. So say, you must go to school. You don't have a choice. It's time to go to school, you go to school. You must get up. It's time to get up. You must go to bed. It's time to go to bed. You must do the dishes. It's your turn to do the dishes or dry them, whatever. You must empty the garbage. It's your turn. You must do this. Must. That sense of ought. They have to have a sense of responsibility from early childhood on, so that when they're confronted with temptations on dating and things like that, they have this sense of ought. I must refrain from any unchaste act. I must not eat meat on Friday during Lent. I must do all the things you must do. They got a sense of obligation, and they have a sense of, in other words, they're not raised in libertinism where they do whatever they want. That's permissive love, which is false love. As we mentioned last night, the permissive love and overprotective love are the two false kinds of love. They're not authentic love. But so they don't want to be raised in permissive love. They need to have a stabilized love of ought, a sense of obligation, that they must go to church. You don't have a choice. We're going to church, period. You don't say, I'm going to stay home from church. You're going to church, period. You're going to school. It's time to go to school. You don't have a choice. You go to school. You must do this. The child has to be raised with that concept of must, so that when it's confronted with temptation, it knows how to respond to an obligation. It doesn't have this total sense of unrestrained freedom, that there's protection and security in control that's not abusive control. Just as you're not free to drive on the wrong side of the road, because your freedom will be lost when you end up in the morgue, the hospital, or the jail. So to maintain your freedom, you have to work within limits. There are fences on all of our behavior. It says a certain type of the road you have to drive on. So these children must learn that from the beginning. When those three things are there, number one, crossfire of love between the parents, visible consistently during the child's life. Second, input of love from both parents in a very intense degree and manifested. Thirdly, a sense of obligation, ought. When those three things are there, you don't have children engaging in premarital intercourse. Okay. Now, I talked a little bit about infancy. I'm just going to squeeze this together. We will have questions afterwards because we're recording this. This matter of birth bonding is so important. Dr. Vernon in Toronto, in this study on Secrets of the Unborn Child, marvelous studies done through both hypnosis regression, age regression, and things that be revealed that there's no way the child could know unless it had been ingrammed in the child from infancy. Some incredible studies. But one of the things they've learned, and I wish I could give you, I'd like to talk about 3 days on bonding. I got a stack of notes about that thick, just on bonding, how to bond to a child. But birth bonding is very important. And this, we talked about critical and hypercritical periods. When the child is born, the father should be present, ideally, of course, as most hospitals are doing today. But in the first 2 hours of life, the first 2 hours after birth, the child needs skin-to-skin contact with both parents for at least 15 minutes within the first 2 hours. Here we're working within a time window now, time frame. The imprinting, like a gosling baby goose has an imprinting period. Baby goose comes out of the egg, and you pull a rock with a string in front of it, and it thinks that's the mother, and for the rest of its life it'll follow that rock. That's imprinting. This child is imprinted with bonding the same way. If it's worked within the first 2 hours, the imprinting on that child by the skin-to-skin contact, that's physical intimacy, that's the child's concept of love in this lower levels of the epigenesis of love. Okay, both the mother and the father, skin-to-skin contact and bonding. When that happens, amazing things happen. First of all, a new bond is related. Not only the maternal instinct is sparked in the mother, particularly after she nurses a child. A mother finds it difficult to give up a child for adoption after nursing it even once, because there's a tremendous amount of hormones, of different types of hormones, and activation of the hypothalamus in the brain of the woman, that she activates these maternal responses. But there's also, almost unknown until recently, a paternal response. The father has a paternal relation to the child when there's a bonding, skin-to-skin contact within the first 2 hours of life, 15 minutes at least of that contact. So without regarding the meconium in the child and all that, putting that child right on the stomach of the mother immediately after birth is part of the Lavoyer's approach to this whole thing. The bonding takes place. Now, what happens here? Incredible things happen when you take 15 minutes for that in the first 2 hours of life. First of all, if you measure the child itself, on the average, at the end of 3 months, you measure the crying time of a baby. If that baby has been bonded, it will cry 540% less than a non-bonded child. Average. 540% less crying. That's really a great help for parents in dealing with a crying baby, huh? Just giving 15 minutes each of the parents within the first 2 hours of life, that's the first thing that will happen. The baby will not cry a lot. It'll be a very peaceful baby, very happy baby. Okay. Second, and this is really amazing. There is a bonding that happens, and this is by God's magnificent design in the structure of family and birth. When that child is born and both parents bond to that child within the first 2 hours, there's another kind of a bonding that takes place called secondary bonding between the father and the mother. So now, this love deepens between the mother and the father, and there is, after that point, a greater level of confidentiality and confidence in each other, and, get this, there's no more adultery on the part of either the mother or the father. No infidelity in marriage after that. God uses the baby to prevent infidelity in marriage. And that's nothing. Wait till you hear this. That same thing that happens when that baby is bonded to the mother and the father within the first 2 hours of life, 15 minutes, within the first 2 hours of life, an amazing thing happens. The paternal instinct in the father is so strong that that father will never attack that child incestuously. With 1 out of 4 girls and 1 out of 8 boys victims of incest. Think of what that would mean. To do away with all incest. The father will never practice incest on the child. In most cases, a father, brother, uncle, incest are relatives, especially father or stepfather is what causes incest mainly. That will never happen if the child is bonded. God uses the child to lock the father into a moral protection from adultery and incest. Isn't that amazing? Now this is not pie in the sky. This stuff is scientifically supported by clinical data. But how it ties in with God's concept of family, but how it ties in with the substrate of love. All of this is love. Nothing but good, pure, chaste love. Isn't it exciting? Okay, you got some target areas. We'll be back. We'll continue this in our next session. Okay, we've been talking a lot about love, and we're going to expound some dimensions of that from a therapeutic perspective as well as a sanctifying perspective. The scientific things we've been talking about may seem to be, as I mentioned earlier, somewhat unspiritual for a spiritual retreat, and I just want to put it back in perspective periodically by reminding you that what we're doing is providing that target area to find the root cause of any problems you might have, and also to recognize problems that you didn't recognize before. So as I mentioned earlier, I will make you sicker before I make you better. And some of you have indicated that already, because people have talked to me during the lunch period and said, "Oh, I feel so guilty now." In a sense that's good, but in a sense it's bad, because moral guilt is impossible without malice. If you maliciously destroyed your children's personality, maliciously, then you have guilt, and then you remove the guilt by a simple act of repentance, apology to God. It's very easy. If there is no malice, there's nothing to remove. So either way, you're clear of moral guilt. However, you may be suffering from guilt complex, which is false guilt, psychological guilt. And we deal with that by being totally convinced of the absence of moral guilt by either of the two things we mentioned, namely the non-existence of it through non-malice, or the forgiveness of it by repentance. In either way, you're free of moral guilt, and therefore, if you're convinced of that, that should dissolve the overlay effect of the psychological guilt. But anyway, the fact that you feel guilt means that you're becoming aware of something you weren't aware of before, because you weren't feeling guilty when you came in, and then you began to feel guilty. That means that something is surfacing. something, you're becoming conscious of something. It's a good sign. Because now you know areas in which you want to focus the prayer. The more of those you have, the more focused the prayer is, and the healing point to come and later, the more effective the prayer will be. Just touching a few of the many scientific things that are of interest, but only in terms of that ultimate relationship to healing. A study at Cornell University, twin goats were born by cesarean section where they had no contact with the mother, or equal non-contact with the mother, the twin kid goats. And they separated those two goats, having exactly the same genetic structure, and they changed only the environment. They allowed one of the kid goats to be with the mother goat, and the other to be separated. And for 20 days, they found drastic effect. That one was very neurotic, and the other was balanced, depending on the presence or absence of the mother. They tried something else with twin goats also. That when these two goats were separated from the mother, and one was given flashing lights to cause stress, lights flashing bright in their eyes on and off for 20 days, which is a very stressful type of stimulus. The goat that had been with the mother had no adverse reaction. The one that had been without the mother, previous to that time, had very severe reactions. Became a neurotic goat. That says something about the protection that is given by not separating a child from the mother, the need for bonding, the need for maintaining the bonding, and the whole element of love, sustained love, expressed love, even in the animalistic level of love, which is very primitive level. It's just presence, touching, nudging, all those things that have to do with animalistic forms of love. Here in Ohio, there was a interesting study. And it was University of Ohio. They were studying cholesterol with rabbits, and they had a laboratory with cages on two sides of the laboratory, and two technicians who were to take care of these rabbits. All the rabbits were given exactly the same nutrition, which was very high cholesterol, egg yolks and things like that. And they watched for cholesterol formation and heart attacks of the rabbits. They thought they'd all be the same. But they found the rabbits on one side of the laboratory were reacting totally different than the other ones. The ones on one side were all just dying off, and the others were thriving. They couldn't figure it out until they noticed that the girl taking care of the thriving rabbits dealt with them as pets. She'd take them out of the cage and hug them and pet them and give names to them and so on, and put them back in the cage. Well, the other girl, taking care of the other side of the laboratory, would simply feed them and nothing else. And when they measured the cholesterol of these two sets of rabbits, they were amazed to see the one had much higher cholesterol than the other. The one that was not given love, the TLC, had higher cholesterol. Now there's two explanations for that, the so-called endothelial cell theory and the hormone theory. I won't go into the technicalities of that because it doesn't serve our purpose here, but it's kind of interesting how they tried to explain that. They do know that the trigger factor was the TLC, tender loving care. Again, just one of thousands and thousands and thousands of experiments that show in animal psychology, comparative psychology, comparing animals with humans, in comparative psychology it shows the need for love. It's an essential nutrient for life, or at least a catalyst for nutrients. And to prevent the deleterious types of things such as cholesterol, the serum cholesterol, even when it's non-fractionated cholesterol, into the LDL and HDL, high density lipoprotein and low density. The overall serum cholesterol is always higher proportionately for persons who don't get love and animals that don't get love. The studies you've read about, I'm sure, about the persons, the type A personality that has, the very active, aggressive, executive type of personality having heart attacks, they have found out that that's not true. But the persons that have this high stress type of life, high pressure type of personality, that's not laid back, but just always pressuring and on the go, they found out that they don't have a higher level of heart attacks and cardiovascular problems and cardiac arrest and all that. They don't have that higher, except among those type A personalities which have hostility added to that aggressiveness. the element of hostility is critically important. They tie that in with a subdivision of hostility called cynicism. By the way, the word cynic comes from the Greek word that means dog, because they're always barking about something, I guess. But anyway, the type A personality are the only one section of the type A personality are disposed to heart attacks, and those are those with high level of hostility. Notice how we go back to that antinomastic emotion we talked about before. If you're hurt, you react with hostility. If you're guilty, you act with guilt. Those two things are always coming up constantly as being the peak things. Now again, going back to Duke University Medical Center, where they've done so much research on this psychosomatic medicine, they found that persons that have moderate degrees of hostility, some resentment against their parents for not loving them enough, or resentment against their teacher, or resentment against the boss or something, they have moderate levels. These persons have 3 times the degree of heart attack as those that have no hostility. If they have a high level of hostility, it goes up to 5 times the mortality rate for cardiovascular reasons. So moderate anger will triple your danger for a heart attack. Heavy anger will quadruple and quintuple that danger. That says a lot. And now, there are many follow-up researches on that have corroborated that. I don't want to waste your time by going through kind of repetitive types of things in this, but I think it's good to know that is very well substantiated. And of course, if you read the book of Proverbs, you see how often that comes in, how the anger and